The Fall 2020 Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher Parent Empowerment Conference. Realities for a New Reality. 2 days, 25 workshops, renowned speakers and presenters, by families, for families, nearly 40 hours of unfiltered and straightforward information, made possible by the leaders in disability rights advocacy for over 45 years, Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher, attorneys at law. So welcome to this session of our ongoing encore presentation series of the Fall 2020 Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher Parent Empowerment Conference.
All right, I think we're going to get going here. Welcome and thank you for attending the Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher Parent Empowerment Conference. My name is Christina Tosti, and I'll be your moderator for this workshop entitled Working While Maintaining Government Benefits. Our presenter for this session is Maria Fisher, a partner at Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher. Before we begin, we ask all participants to remain muted throughout this session. This workshop will last approximately 90 minutes, and the presenter will take questions intermittently throughout the presentation. Please ask your questions through the chat feature in the control bar, and I will ask as many of them as I can, again, time permitting. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Maria Fisher. Maria is personally committed to the field of disability law. The mother of an adult daughter with autism, Maria's legal work focuses on guardianship, estate planning, and helping families of adults with disabilities access and retain appropriate services. She completed an internship at the New Jersey Department of the Public Advocate, where she conducted legal research and drafted papers on civil rights, healthcare, education, and administrative law. She has testified before the New Jersey legislature on housing issues related to individuals with developmental disabilities and on controversial policies of the Division of Developmental Disabilities. She has assisted in the development of several pieces of legislation to expand and protect the rights of individuals with disabilities. She's the president of the board of directors of the ARC Mercer and is the immediate past chairperson of the Special Olympics of New Jersey. Additionally, she is a member of the Family Advisory Committee at the Supportive Housing Association of New Jersey. She earned her JD from Seton Hall University of Law and is a member of the Pennsylvania and New Jersey bars. Maria enjoys spending time with her children, Kelly, Tracy, and Matthew, as well as her extended family and friends. She likes dancing, going to concerts, and traveling, and she currently lives in Mercer County with her 2 youngest children. Now, take it away, Maria.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us on this Saturday morning to learn about working and benefits. I hope everybody's like wide awake and ready for this topic. It's an interesting one and one that is becoming much more prevalent over time as more individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities are being given the opportunity to work and have actually joined the workforce, which is a fabulous, wonderful trend that we are starting to see. But then the question always becomes, what happens to the benefits that the individual needs for their supports? And those supports could include supports at work, supports at home, supports in an independent living arrangement, and it becomes this very difficult tug. And I very often have clients come in, and the concern is really, my child is given this opportunity to work, but if it's going to make things real complicated or they're going to lose their benefits, maybe that's not what we should be doing. And my answer is always, wait a minute, no. Somebody has the ability to work. We want them to do that. We want them to have that experience. Work is a very important part of everybody's life. And we want to make sure that we give those same opportunities to an individual with an intellectual and developmental disability. We just sort of have to know the rules and understand the choices that we're making when an individual begins to work. So the beginning part of this presentation normally goes a little bit into depth about benefits because you need to understand those benefits in some capacity to understand how work then impacts them. However, for the purposes of today, it's going to be a very cursory kind of look at just what the benefits are, because following this workshop, Beverly Roberts of the State Arc of New Jersey is doing an in-depth presentation on eligibility for all of these benefits. This will allow me to really focus on the work piece of it. So just bear with us as we kind of go through the first few slides a little bit quickly. what are the benefits that we are trying to maintain when an individual works? Well, we want to try to maintain always Medicaid, because remember, Medicaid is the funding source that is used for individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities to receive benefits through the Division of Developmental Disabilities. So when we look at Medicaid, that's what will support an individual having a day program, work supports, and independent living supports at some point in the future. Without Medicaid, all of that falls away, and that becomes very scary for families with an individual who cannot independently live on their own, work on their own, or manage their day on their own. So we want to make sure that we always maintain Medicaid eligibility. And most individuals with a developmental disability get their Medicaid through one of these sources here that are listed. So in New Jersey, when an individual is deemed eligible for SSI, Supplemental Security Income, they automatically get their Medicaid. New Jersey is what's known as a presumptive eligibility state. So once you're eligible for SSI, you are presumed eligible for Medicaid, no separate application to be filled out. So maintaining your SSI eligibility for most people is the connection to their Medicaid. Some people get their Medicaid through what we call the Age Blind Disabled Medicaid program. This program also has income limits, which is why when we're working and receiving benefits, we have to be careful. Workability sometimes is that catch-all. So for somebody who can work relatively substantially, but which causes them to lose either Medicaid through SSI or Medicaid through Age Blind Disabled, workability sometimes becomes the way that we're able to maintain that Medicaid eligibility. And the disabled adult child status, I know Bev's going to go into this in depth, but this is a status that allows an individual who is receiving an SSI benefit and then begins receiving a benefit on a parent's Social Security record, which may knock them out of benefits. It allows them to keep Medicaid, but then there are still other little income and resource limitations that we have to be aware of. So that's kind of the cursory way. If any of you who are on this session, if you already have a child who's over the age of 18, they are probably getting their Medicaid through one of these four options. Christine, you can go to the next slide. Okay. So SSI requires an individual's income limit, and we're going to really just focus on the income limit piece of this slide because that's what's going to dovetail into the working, to be approximately $800. It's a little bit less than $800. If somebody has income, whether that income be earned or unearned income, of over that amount, you lose your SSI eligibility, and then you also lose your Medicaid that you were getting through SSI. So this is the piece that becomes very tricky for families. And okay, if the individual is working, how do I keep my SSI benefit and therefore keep my Medicaid benefit in place? And that is what we are going to focus on for today. Next slide. All right. I kind of went over this already, that with SSI, there is no additional paperwork to be completed. Next slide, Christina. Okay. Age Blind Disabled Medicaid has an income limit of $1,064. So again, if an individual begins working and they're getting their Medicaid through the ABD program and they start to earn more than $1,064 a month, their Medicaid becomes in jeopardy. So we want to hold on to those numbers because that's really the piece we're going to talk about today. Workability, totally different kind of program. Person can earn up to $60,000 a year. Their resources can be much higher as well. Those usually, if somebody's on workability, working obviously is a mandatory part of the eligibility process, so it doesn't typically affect or take away their ability to work. So sometimes this becomes the program that an individual will go to if working substantially. You can go to the next slide and the next one. All right. And this is just a brief overview of the disabled adult child status. I know Bev's going to go into this in great detail. I gave you the short snippet on that as well. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about benefits. So Social Security Administration has 3 different benefits that an individual can receive. One of them is SSI, Supplemental Security Income, which affords an individual an amount of money each month to help pay for their basic needs. The next benefit that they have is a Social Security disability benefit. And Social Security disability benefit is for an individual who is working, has paid into the system, and then is determined disabled and can receive a benefit sometimes on their own work history, sometimes they're receiving a benefit on a parent's work history. That money also counts as income to the individual. That is considered unearned income. Unearned income also affects the individual's ability to get an SSI benefit or a Medicaid benefit, because those numbers we talked about before, that around $800 number and the 1,064 number, that's for income, whether it be earned or unearned. So if somebody's getting a Social Security benefit, that also becomes important. And sometimes individuals are getting a Social Security benefit as well as working, and those 2 things also kind of have to dovetail together to make sure that we're below those income limits as well. All right. So Christina, you can actually flip 2 slides because I went through 2, and we're going to get into the meat of what this is really about. Because this is really about working and receiving your benefits. So can an individual work while receiving an SSI benefit? Absolutely. But you have to remember that earned income will affect the amount of an individual's SSI benefit, as well as unearned income would also affect that. So does this mean an individual should not work? Absolutely not. It just means that you have to know the rules. So first we're going to tackle the rules regarding the effect of unearned income on an individual's benefits. So when an individual has an SSDI benefit, and SSDI is one of the forms of unearned income, but there are quite a few. So unearned income is anything that you get passively, that you're not actually working to get. So it could be a Social Security retirement benefit on a parent's work history. It can be an SSDI benefit if a parent has become disabled and is receiving a Social Security benefit. I'm sorry for the noise in the background. It's a truck going by. If they're receiving a benefit on a parent's work record through Social Security. Child support is considered unearned income. Monthly payments from a lawsuit, from an annuity, anything that is not something that you're actually going out and earning is considered unearned income. So when an individual has unearned income, the Social Security Administration, as well as Medicaid, does a certain kind of does a calculation. So for an SSI benefit, Social Security Administration says we will forgive the first $20 of any income an individual gets, whether that be earned or unearned. So if an individual is getting $520 a month from a Social Security disability benefit, the first $20 is completely forgiven, and then the rest of it, the $500, becomes a dollar for dollar reduction of the individual's benefit that they are receiving. We always have to, for SSI purposes, we always have to remain below the income amount of approximately $800. And for age blind disabled, we also have to stay below the 1,064. If we go over that in a month, we will lose our benefits. So for an individual who's working but not working over those numbers, the effect becomes that the money that they get from SSI is reduced. So if an individual is getting $700 a month from the Social Security Administration as an SSI benefit, they're getting a $500 benefit. They're getting $500 in Social Security disability benefit, $520 of Social Security benefit, unearned income. Their benefit will be reduced to $200 a month, but they will keep their Medicaid, which is truly what what we're working here for. We're really working to keep that Medicaid, underlying Medicaid in place. So as you can see in our case study, Mary received $700 from SSI. The Social Security Administration notified Mary that she'll be receiving $520 a month in an SSDI benefit. What happens to Mary's SSI? Well, $500, it's reduced by $500. So Mary will receive $500 that month because she's going to get her SSDI benefit of $520. And then she's going to get the $200 a month from SSI. So she, in effect, is going to have more money than what she would have had if she only got her SSI benefit. But there is definitely a reduction to that SSI benefit. But the two combined keep her in the same place, and she doesn't lose her Medicaid. Our next example is we're going to talk about what happens when you're working. So it's actual earned work income. So if an individual goes to work, the government always wants to incentivize individuals working. So what they do for your earned income, okay, so now we have a child who goes out, they have a job, and they're earning money. The first $65 of any earned income, completely forgiven. So if the child is only making $65 in a month, there will be no effect on their SSI benefit at all. And if that child only has earned income, has no unearned income, the government also says, well, that $20 is a exclusion for any income. So if you don't have unearned, it goes towards your earned income. So actually in that case, a child would be able to earn $85 in a month with zero effect on their benefits. Anything over that $85, it's not a dollar for dollar reduction like the unearned income, it's 50 cents on the dollar that then gets deducted from the individual's SSI benefit. But it allows the individual to keep some monthly amount coming in. And again, as long as we're under the income limit, we still have to stay under that approximate $800 income limit, we will keep our benefits in place. So we're going to look at a case study here for how this affects an individual. So we have John, who's receiving $600 a month from SSI. John is currently working and he earns $285 a month. The first $20 and the first $65 of John's income is excluded because John has no unearned income. The remaining $200 that's left is divided in half and deducted from his SSI benefit. So John will receive $500 a month from SSI. So if John was only receiving SSI, he would have gotten $600 for the month. But if John works and receives SSI, he will receive $785 in that month because he gets the $285 from his job and $500 that's left from the SSI benefit. So John has extra money that month. There is a benefit to John working and receiving his benefits, and he doesn't lose his Medicaid or his SSI benefit in this case. Christine, I don't know if there's any questions on this before we get to the next case study. You're on mute, Christina.
All right, so I have, is the amount $800 or is it $1,064?
It depends on the program that you're on. So for SSI, it's around $780 a month is what your income is allowed to be. If you're not on SSI, for some people are not eligible for SSI for a whole host of reasons, but they are eligible for what we call age blind disabled Medicaid. For that program, income has to stay below $1,064.
Okay. Please discuss what happens if an individual gets over $1,064 SSD based on parents' earnings and they have a job earning money.
Okay, we will absolutely get there. And I'm guessing that individual was, and I'm going to ask this question so the person maybe can respond back. If that individual is getting unearned income on the parent, did that individual ever have SSI before receiving the parent's benefit? Because that is material to whether or not the individual can keep their SSI benefit and Medicaid through SSI, keep that eligibility piece in place. And I don't know if is that in the does the question include any background on that?
No background on that, just based off of the parents' earnings. And that was the only other question that we had. So,
all right, so we're going to look at a case study for an individual who has both earned and unearned income, because this often does happen as well. So we have Jane, who receives $600 a month in an SSI benefit. She receives $120 a month in a Social Security disability benefit. So we all know that that's unearned income. And she earns $165 a month in income from her job. Social Security Administration will forgive the first $20 of the SSDI benefit, and will then reduce the SSI benefit by $100, because it's a dollar for dollar reduction after the $20 exclusion is calculated. $65 of her $165 of a monthly income will also be excluded, and then her benefit will be reduced by $50. So remember, this is earned income, $165, first $65 is forgiven, and then the next 100, it's 50 cents on the dollar that is reduced. So what happens to Jane's Social Security benefit of $600? We reduce it by $150. So Jane will receive $450 that month from the Social Security Administration as an SSI benefit. But overall, for the month, Jane is receiving $120 a month from SSDI, $165 a month in her income, and $450 a month in an SSI benefit. So overall, combined, there's still a benefit for her to work and continue to receive her benefits.
That person got back to us, Maria, and yes, that person had SSI before receiving SSD from the parents' earnings.
Okay, so in that case, I will explain this. Bev Roberts is also, I'm sure, going to go into great detail on this. But so when an individual is receiving an SSI benefit and then receives a benefit based on a parent either reaching retirement age and actually collecting their Social Security benefit, or if the parent themselves becomes disabled and is able to receive an SSDI benefit, when you have a child who has been disabled since birth, that child is entitled to receive a portion of the parent's benefit. So typically what happens is the child is going to receive approximately half of what the parent is receiving, but it does not diminish the parent. So it's not like, well, the parent was supposed to get $2,000, the kid's going to get $1,000, now the parent gets $1,000. Parent still gets their $2,000 based on their work history, which they are entitled to. And as a disabled adult child, their child is entitled to approximately half of the benefit, so the child will be receiving $1,000. The issue there is that that's over the amount you're allowed to have for SSI. So if this individual was on SSI first and getting Medicaid through SSI, when they begin to receive that $1,000, the following things should happen. Parents should get a letter from Social Security that says, your child is now going to receive $1,000 a month based on your work history. That's always great news, because now they're getting more than they were getting as an SSI benefit. Then they get a letter that says, we've now reduced their SSI benefit to zero and are terminating their SSI because they have income over the $780. And parents usually go, okay, that's all right. So still a gain. It's the next letter that puts everybody into a major panic, because then we get a letter that says, we've been notified that you've lost your SSI and you were getting your Medicaid by virtue of your SSI. So you're now going to lose your Medicaid, and there's a date usually filled in there. It could be 60 days, it could be 90 days. There's a date that's in there about when your Medicaid eligibility will terminate. It also says in there, well, you might want to go to your county board of social services because there may be some way for you to get a different Medicaid program. And there absolutely is. What this is called is a DAC status, disabled adult child status. And there is a federal regulation that says in that scenario, so long as the child would remain eligible for SSI if they were not getting their parents' benefit, they will keep their Medicaid. So basically what happens is the Board of Social Services drops the invisibility cloak from like Harry Potter over mom or dad's benefit, and it's as if it's not there, and they go, okay, let's see. Would this child be eligible for SSI? Because that doesn't really count. And typically the answer is yes. They give the individual back their Medicaid. But what that means is that that individual has to still meet SSI eligibility going forward. So they can't go out and get a job now that goes over the $780. So all of these other rules would apply for them to keep their Medicaid. They no longer get an SSI monthly benefit. That goes away, but they get the higher benefit on the parent and they keep their Medicaid in place, but they absolutely must keep their income below the $780 and their resources below the $2,000. If either one of those things are not in place, so you would not otherwise be eligible for SSI, you would lose your Medicaid. So for that family, I don't know when the situation happened, but you can just take these letters. It doesn't even matter if it was years ago that it happened. You can go down to the Board of Social Services and Medicaid should easily be reinstated based on that. But you do still have to then maintain working under the SSI rules. Any other questions or?
So we've got, how does Social Security determine the amount of SSI on a monthly basis?
So I'm going to assume that the question is related to how do they figure all of this out when somebody is working? So as far as the SSDI, the unearned income, you have to notify them that the individual is getting unearned income. You also have to notify them of the individual's working. And I can tell you that it's actually gotten to a point of being extremely simple to do. So I know a couple of years ago, it used to require parents to call the Social Security Administration at the end of each month and say, my child worked this much, have the pay stubs in front of you, give them all of this information, and then they're always kind of like a month lag, so that's always being deducted from the prior Social Security check. So they had to do that. Some of the offices allowed you to like fax the information in. Now, quite frankly, there's an app for that. There's an app for everything. Social Security Administration has an app, and I highly recommend it because my own daughter works through her program, and she does get paid from her program. So all I have to do at the beginning of every month is open up the app, put in her Social Security number, and put in the amount of her gross income, close it out, and then I just get a letter from Social Security saying, oh, thank you for giving us this information. This month, her benefit will be reduced by X. And then you just get it. So it is on you, the rep payee, actually, so it depends. Whoever the representative payee is, it's on you to always notify the Social Security Administration of any changes, including of an individual's working. So that would be how they would get that information.
Questions are starting to come in now. If my son has ABD Medicaid and he becomes employed after Medicaid approval with income less than 1064, does he need to notify our county's BSS because his circumstances changed? He has no unearned income.
No, he does not, because when you're having ABD Medicaid, you're not receiving a monthly benefit that needs to be reduced. You're receiving only the Medicaid. The requirement of notifying Social Security monthly is so that they can adjust your Social Security benefit. Now, age blind disabled Medicaid, although some counties are more on top of this than others, but they're all kind of moving towards a system where they will be doing what they call annual redeterminations. So you will on an annual basis get an redetermination application, and basically what it asks for is any change in income, any change in living status, and usually copies of some bank statements to make sure that you're keeping the individual's resources below the resource amount. So that's where they will pick that up, but because there's no net effect, you do not have to do that on a monthly basis in the same way that you do with Social Security.
Okay, and then what if the disabled adult child gets more than $1,000 on parents' SSI? Will that make her not eligible for Medicaid?
No. So I don't know so I'm not sure if the question here is that the child was not receiving SSI before, because if the child received SSI first and then got this benefit, it's the scenario that I just said. Now, for a child who was not receiving SSI before and is now receiving $1,000 from a Social Security benefit on the parent, they would not have a way to keep the Medicaid through SSI in place. But if their benefit is only $1,000 from the parent, and that's the only income, is that what the question said? That was their only income, is the $1,000 on the parent?
Yep.
Okay. then that's the kind of person who age blind disabled becomes a godsend for, because their income limit is 1,064. So you can go and just apply directly for the age blind disabled Medicaid. So it's just a matter of looking for a Medicaid program that has a higher income limit. And I'm going to assume in all cases, when I'm talking, that individuals also are DDD eligible. So if an individual is DDD eligible and they have earned income on a parent that, let's say, instead of being $1,000 is $1,500 a month, and they never had received SSI previously, can't get age blind disabled either. But DDD has what's called the supports program waiver, and that waiver has a higher income limit. So you would work with your support coordinator to get the waiver application, and you can apply for Medicaid through the supports program waiver. That is only open to DDD eligible individuals. Any other questions on that?
What is the usual amount of SSI benefit if the recipient is not working?
So an individual, I think the question is, what does an individual typically receive from Social Security Administration as an SSI benefit? So there's a higher limit and a lower limit. So they're either going to receive somewhere around 5-ish or somewhere around 7 to 8-ish. And that depends on what kind of in-kind support the individual is receiving. So in-kind support in the world of Social Security is anything that is available to the individual for food, clothing, and shelter. What the Social Security Administration does for an individual, so I'll take my daughter as an example just to make it sort of easy. So Tracy lives with me, and I provide her with her food, clothing, and shelter. So the Social Security Administration, after they determined Tracy to be eligible, she met the disability criteria, she met the income and resource limitations, then has a conversation with me about how much is your mortgage or your rent, what are your property taxes, what's your gas and electric bill, what is your food bill, what is your water sewer bill, and home insurance bill. You give them all that information, they total it up, and they say how many people live in your household. They divide that number by the number of people in your household. If that number comes out to be low enough that if Tracy was getting the highest benefit that Social Security can give, and just for example, let's just say it's $700 to use a round number, and let's say all of my bills together divided by the people living in my household were $500 a person, they would give Tracy the $700 number because they would deem that she wasn't really getting any in-kind support. She can pay her own way. On the other hand, if it costs, let's say, $1,000 per person to live in my household, they would deem that Tracy is receiving in-kind support, because even if they gave Tracy the highest number of $700, she still couldn't pay her own way. So what they do is they give her a 1/3 reduction in her benefit. So she drops from the 700 something number down to a 500 and something number because she's getting quote unquote in-kind support in the world of Social Security. And yes, I do realize it's completely counterintuitive, because the more money the individual would need to live in that arrangement, the less money they actually get. I don't make the rules. The rules are made by the federal government, and that's just the rule that it is. In-kind support is just deemed income, and they do a 1/3 reduction for that.
Okay. Maria clearly explained what happens if an adult child gets SSDI based off the parent's work record. What if the adult child gets SSDI through their own work record? Does the process work the same, including the part about going to county social services?
So no, now that's a little bit different. So if the individual is receiving their own SSDI benefit, that particular federal regulation does not cover them. It's only if you're receiving on a parent's work history. So if the child themselves is receiving over $780, let's say the child's receiving $800 on their own SSDI benefit, they would lose their SSI, and they don't have that federal regulation to protect that. But again, we would have to then look at the individual would likely, if still working, would be able to go to workability as a way to get their Medicaid. because if the individual is working, receiving an SSDI benefit on their own work history, they can get workability so long as, you know, their income isn't over like $60,000 a year. And I think for most of us, if that's what our child was doing, we probably wouldn't be looking at these Medicaid programs. So that would be the fix for that. Now, if that child is getting $1,000 a month on their own SSDI benefit, is no longer working, then we would be looking at age blind disabled, or again, if they are a DDD recipient, we would be looking to the supports program waiver to get their Medicaid.
We applied for DAC status, but the individual was given the aged blind disabled application. The person's visually impaired. The application included the amount of SSD money the individual would receive was over $1064. The letter approving Medicaid indicated the program under which Medicaid was approved as workability. Did the county Medicaid office make a mistake? What are the consequences? The individual has had a 5-hour-a-week part-time job for 4 years previous to receiving SSD.
Okay, so this is a little hard to answer in this format. So I'm going to do some general responses to that. And then we're going to move on to like another concept, and there'll be another chance for more questions too. So first of all, the application is for every application that I have seen for every county Medicaid says New Jersey age blind disabled at the top. Don't know why. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Again, I would want to have different applications that say what you think you should be applying for. The theory in the background is this: you put in the application, and technically Medicaid is supposed to, let's say you put in the application and it says age blind disabled at the top, but the individual isn't eligible for that, but the individual is actually eligible for workability. They're simply supposed to use that information to determine which of the Medicaid programs best fits your scenario. So don't get thrown by that age blind disabled on the top. Even the application that gets filled out for the community care program through DDD and the sports program through DDD, they say that on the top too, because they use the county's form. So just disregard what it says at the top. So now I think the next part of the question was, the person had a part-time job, so when you got your letter back, they actually said that the person's eligible for workability. That's fine. You're just supposed to, as long as the person's getting Medicaid, which one they're getting doesn't really matter. But so I'm hoping the individual is still working, which was not clear to me in the question, but you said they had a part-time job. So I hope they have still the part-time job, because you need to be working to be on workability. So there's no problem with that. But what I would caution this family to do is those letters you received from Social Security that clearly said the individual was getting SSI, then got your benefit, then got knocked off, and then ended up on workability. You want to make sure you know where those are, because if the child does lose that job and then is no longer working and loses workability, you want to be able to hand those letters over to the county board again, because it doesn't matter that something else came in between. You'll be able to use that federal regulation to get Medicaid back for that individual. So I hope that answered the question. That's try a general answer to a very specific question. So I think we might, yes, so I want to talk about another Social Security concept, which is often very, very helpful. So you've heard me say throughout this that we have to stay below the income limitation. And for purposes of the conversation, I'm just saying around $800 a month for the purposes of SSI. And a lot of people find that very problematic, because you get a part-time job, and especially with minimum wage going up in the way that it is, individuals are going to become bumping up or going over that number. So there's another concept that is helpful here. So Social Security has two tests. So all we've been talking about right now is the income test. We haven't talked about the SGA part of this. So as a backdrop, and Bev is going to discuss this in detail, the individual has to be determined to have a disability in the world of Social Security. That is done by the Social Security Administration determining that the individual does not have the ability, has nothing to do with what they are actually doing, but does not have the ability to engage in substantial gainful activity, which is SGA. And that is right now defined as $1,260 a month. So if an individual is earning over $1,260 in a 1 month period, the Social Security Administration will determine that they do not even have a disability. That makes all of your benefits go away. That does not give you the ability to then go get age blind disabled Medicaid, because the Medicaid offices defer to a Social Security Administration determination of disability. So this is a much more rigid test, and we're just going to hold workability to the side. We'll talk about that because that does not fall under this rule. So this SGA rule is a Social Security rule. It does affect Medicaid programs, but it is slightly different for workability. So just keep that in mind as I'm talking. So sometimes we have individuals who are working and they're going over the income limit. So now they're getting, now they're bumping up against the SGA about whether or not they actually have a disability in the world of Social Security. And that can completely take away eligibility. However, SGA is not determined on income alone. So when we have an individual who needs either impairment-related work expenses or receives what we call subsidies or special considerations at a job, we can work with the Social Security Administration to reduce how much of the income is actually going towards SGA. So for instance, if an individual is working, but the only way to maintain that job is that they have a job coach, we can say to the Social Security Administration that the individual isn't really engaging in SGA because they're hiring a job coach. Now, the difficult caveat with this is that the individual has to be paying the job coach from their own funds. It's not a DDD job coach. So for some people, this won't necessarily apply, but there may be other things that will apply, like assistive technology devices, medication, special transportation that the individual is paying for. So it's important that the parents don't swoop in and pay it for the individual. They actually use their work money for it, because then we can show to the Social Security Administration, well, yes, they're maintaining this job, but this is what it costs them to maintain that job. So therefore, that they have not gone over SGA. And this has proved very helpful to certain clients over the years to keep benefits in place by showing Social Security that you can't count SGA if the person's actually expending money in order to keep the job. So we had one example. I had an individual who was earning over SGA but was paying $800 a month to a private job coach to go with her to work. So if you take, I think the person was making like $1,300 a month. So if you deduct out that $800, she's really not making over SGA. And because due to her disability, she needed that kind of support, we were able to keep her benefits in place. The same thing happens, and this is really the more common one that we are seeing now, is what we call a compassionate employer. So we have an employer who is hiring somebody with an intellectual and developmental disability, knowing that that's the case, and wanting to give this individual an opportunity to work. So what they'll do is they'll carve out the job. So instead of saying, you know, you're a stock boy and every stock boy that we hire has to work this number of hours with this number of breaks, they have to do the following 7 tasks. I'm just going to make these up. Like they have to stock the shelves, they have to price the items, they have to rotate stock, they have to clean the front end, they have to get the carts, they have to bag when necessary. It's only 6. I can't come up with the 7th thing that I can think of. But let's say that's the typical job description. But they have an individual who has an intellectual disability and they're hiring them as a stock boy. And they say, you know what? We're not going to expect the exact same from you. We're going to tailor the job to you. We don't want you getting carts out in the parking lot. It might be a little bit dangerous. We don't need you cleaning the front end. Maybe you're going to bag and you're going to stock shelves or something like that. But we're not going to pay you any differently because you're still here, you're doing a job. This is what we've decided that we want to do as a company. And this is happening more and more. So Social Security may look at this and say that the individual is working over SGA and want to say they no longer have a disability. And if they're able to do that, the individual loses their ability to go to get a different Medicaid program. They also, which is critically important, lose the ability to, at a later date, receive a benefit on a parent's work history because they have not been disabled since before the age of 22. If in between, if they're 24, they're 25, and they're doing this job and they're determined to not have a disability in the world of Social Security. We definitely do not want that to happen. So what happens is Social Security will write to you and say, you know, the individual is working over SGA. We don't believe that they have a disability. There are forms and letters that need to be filled out, certifications from the present employer explaining why the individual's job is different, that they allow them additional breaks, that they have changed the criteria for the job. And we submit all of this to the Social Security Administration. And after a review of such, they very often take back their initial thought that the person doesn't have a disability, and they realize that what's really going on here is that the person is receiving supports and help in order to make that SGA, and then they take that piece back. So we always want to be careful that we never lose our determination of a disability because it goes forward into the future with benefits that you want your child to be able to take advantage of. So any questions on SGA or employment-related work expenses?
None on these. I had one from that same person with the individual who had a job for 4 years. They said they were still working, but they were over the asset limit, and they're worried about the unearned income limit, Social Security disability over $1,300. What should be done? The person gets over $1,300 a month plus earnings from the job they continually had for 4 years.
The person said they're having an asset limit problem.
Yes, but working over the asset limit, worried about being over the unearned income limit. SSD is over $1,300. What should be done?
Okay, so in a resource limit, you simply have to get your resources below the amount. There's nothing you can do about that. So you can't save these funds in just anywhere. So there are ABLE accounts that you can look at. There are special needs trusts that you can look at depending on what the assets are. But assets are resources. That's different than income. And then as far as the income, so they're getting $1,300 on a parent.
Plus what they're earning from the job they continually had for 4 years.
Okay. I'm going to try to, I like to hold that question aside because there's like too many questions I have to ask in order to give an answer. So let's hold that to the side. We'll figure out. In a live conference, this is where I would say, can you just come and talk to me at the end? I still haven't figured out exactly how to do that at a Zoom conference. So so a little bit at a loss there, but I do need to ask you to just hold that because I've got to ask way too many questions to give you answers to that piece of it. So hold on to that and we'll try to figure out a way for me to get you an answer or to have a little bit of a conversation about it.
If there's no other questions, so.
Good. All right. So there are also an individual who is still in school through the Social Security Administration is able to also work if the school if it's part of their program, they're under 22 and the school, so a lot of times individuals do work through school. There is different rules for that. And if your child is doing an internship through school or they have a job where they're actually getting paid and it is affecting either SGA or their income amount for their Social Security benefits, it is something to talk to the school about. They do have to fill out paperwork regarding the program. And then there's much higher limit that the individual is able to earn, but it's just for that short period of time when an individual is in school. Another question that constantly comes up with benefits is, and with regard to the stimulus payments, is how does this affect individuals and their benefits? What is it counted as? So the Social Security Administration has determined that it will not count any of those stimulus payments that came in as income. So that's a great thing. So it's not earned income or unearned income. You don't have to report it. It's not going to make any effect on the individual's benefits in the month that it came in. They have also come out and said that as a resource, they will not count the money that somebody would receive from the stimulus payments as a resource for a year from the time that it was received. So if any of those things are throwing people over their resource limits, you don't have to worry about that either, because the government came out and said we're just not doing that. Don't have a slide on this, but another thing that's come up mostly due to the coronavirus is unemployment. So a lot of individuals who were working, who had either lost their job due to the coronavirus, or a business shut down because of it, or a family decided that it just wasn't safe for the individual to go out for any of those reasons. I have had some families who have applied for an unemployment benefit and have been surprised that the unemployment benefit has now kind of wreaked havoc with benefits. So they do. Unemployment is unearned income. So it follows the same unearned income rules that any other income would count. So you just need to be aware of that, and it will disallow the individual from their benefits for the period that they are receiving it. Now, once the unemployment ends, which is either when the extensions for the unemployment would be over, or if the individual does return to work, you want to then re-notify Social Security of the fact that that has stopped, and your benefits should then reset. But that has become quite a bit of a hot button issue, especially since unemployment during this period, thanks to a lot of maneuvering on the government's part, both state and federal, has been extremely generous. And individuals have actually, in some cases, earned more on unemployment than they were ever earning in their work. So it really did wreak some havoc with different benefits as far as, it counting as unearned income, but it certainly does count as that. Any other questions?
So I have one saying, are individuals allowed to go to college? Do they have do they have to be under a certain number of credits? Is there an adverse impact to Social Security, Medicaid, DDD eligibility?
I think the question is, can an individual go to college and still be determined to have a disability? So the answer is yes, an individual can go to college and still be determined to have a disability. Each program has a different disability criteria. Does it make it more difficult for an individual who has a college degree to be considered eligible for some of these benefits? Yes, it will. But there's a lot of individuals who are going to college and are still being able to meet the criteria. So your DDD criteria is a functional test. So it says, is the individual have a developmental intellectual disability? Did it manifest before 22? Is it likely to continue indefinitely? And does it create a substantial functional limitation in 3 of 7 areas of life activity, which are self-care, learning, receptive and expressive language, mobility, self-direction, capacity for independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. So an individual can go to college and still have those limitations. Is it common? It's not common, but yes, it can happen, and you can still be DDD eligible. Same thing with, Social Security benefit and SSI benefit. An individual has to be determined by the Social Security Administration to be unable to engage in substantial gainful activity. If somebody's able to go to college and secure a degree, does that become more difficult to prove that they can't do those things that would allow them to get a job? It does, but it's also not impossible. So again, if the child that you're asking questions about has the ability to go to college, even if it's on a very part-time basis or if it's a college experience program, those are also looked at differently. You should never hold the child back just based on this, but just understand where it may create difficulty. But I have helped families of individuals who have gone to college get both DDD and SSI eligibility, because we are looking at holistically all of the parts of this, and a college degree in and of itself doesn't necessarily negate this. It does make it a little bit more difficult.
So I got a question that popped up in my email for this seminar. If I start to charge rent for my son when he's 18, how can I calculate the home expenses to get the most out of the SSI benefit for him? We have 4 family members in the household.
Okay. So the Social Security Administration, if you are actually charging your child rent and you have a lease and you give them that information, they will recalculate in most cases your benefit, and it can go from that $500 benefit up to that higher $700 and something benefit based on the fact that the individual is quote unquote paying their own way. I have clients who do that. I have clients who don't do that. What you need to definitely be aware of is that when you are charging your child rent, you're telling the Social Security Administration that you are doing this. Remember, rent to you is income to you. So there may be an adverse impact on your own taxes. So before I would go and do this, definitely speak to your accountant and make sure that there's not going to be an adverse impact on you charging the child rent, because it will be considered income to you. Also, the Social Security Administration looks for an individual who's paying rent in the home as a technical matter. It's supposed to be like buying their own food, keeping their stuff separate. So they try to look at it as a calculus of where it's not actually the sort of a family situation. But definitely providing that information to them can get your child a higher SSI benefit.
Does the 600 additional federal unemployment count over the state unemployment?
Yes, it definitely counts as part of your unearned income, yes.
Okay. Does Pell Grant money count as income for a $1,300 per month?
That's a great question. The Pell Grant money goes directly to a school for tuition. That's a question I'm asking.
I was like, no. So we'll wait for that answer. And then I have.
Well, wait, let me finish the answer. So if the Pell Grant money is paid directly to the school to go towards tuition, it would be, I've not researched this answer, but logically, it should not count as unearned income, because that's not going, it doesn't make a stopover at the person. So if it's the federal government paying a Pell Grant directly for tuition, my guess is that it does not count as unearned income to the individual.
A lot of ID programs are out of state. So is that an issue if the adult is not living at home in New Jersey?
Okay, so I'm going to guess what you mean is the individual is in a residential setting that's outside the state of New Jersey, and they're placed there just for purposes of their disability, in which case, I think the question is, where do you apply for your benefits? So that becomes a little bit of a mixed bag. So if the individual's is under guardianship and the guardianship is here in New Jersey, they are considered to be a New Jersey resident who is simply placed out of state, no different than a typically developing child who goes off to college. They don't send your kid off to, I don't know, University of, Georgia, and they don't get in-state tuition because they're not a resident in that state. They're still a resident here in New Jersey. That's not where they actually are living. So same concept, if your child is placed out of state in a residential program, they're still a resident here in New Jersey. Their benefits would be through here in New Jersey.
My 19-year-old disabled child is receiving SSI. I have her guardianship. Can she manage her SSI income, or do I have to be the representative payee for her?
So that is really up to the Social Security Administration. So when an individual is getting benefits, if the Social Security Administration thinks that the individual cannot manage their own funds, they will want a representative payee to be appointed. And basically, if they decide that she needs one, somebody has to step up. It is not subject to the guardianship. So just because mom and dad are the guardians doesn't mean that they're going to be representative payee. Typically, one of you would be, but there's only one representative payee, not two. And the Social Security Administration makes their own determination. They are not subject to what the guardianship piece says. So I don't know if the parent is asking because they want their child to be able to manage their own SSI benefits and they don't want to be the representative payee, or they want to be. But in either case, it's not your choice and it's not your daughter's choice. The choice is of the Social Security Administration if they determine whether or not she can actually manage those funds.
Can I charge my child for household expenses, not just towards rent?
The answer to that is yes, your child can reimburse you for stuff that you buy for them or provide for them within the household. So, and that would not be income to you if they're simply reimbursing. It's different than rent. So for instance, if you want to say that at the beginning of every month when the money comes in from SSI, the child is going to pay $200 towards the food bill. Or if you tell the child, well, here's the cell phone bill and here's, we're on a family plan, but this column is yours and you're going to pay Verizon that money. You can absolutely do that. Same thing with like your cable or your Wi-Fi or any of those types of things. A child can absolutely pay their portion of it. And it's best if they pay it directly as opposed to just handing the money over to mom or dad. But they can absolutely pay towards the household bills.
Yeah, and somebody had followed up, said like electricity and water as well.
Yes, they can.
Going back to determining monthly benefit amount through the in-kind support, how does Social Security contact us for the interview questions? Is it through an application or phone interview?
Typically, it's done by phone, and I think under the current circumstances, everything is being done by phone. That part of it is typically done by phone. They call after you've received your letter that lays out that the individual is eligible and when they will start receiving benefits, and then they call the parent to ask all of those questions.
Another individual whose child is going to school full-time. My son currently receives SSI and is also a full-time college student. If he's received a merit scholarship from his college, is that considered unearned income? He never sees that money. The university just reduces his tuition with that scholarship money.
Yeah, I do not believe that that would be counted as unearned income. So I would say no.
Long one. My child is turning 18 in November and has been receiving $1,200 a month under my work record because I'm disabled and have been for 17 years. I'm currently going through all the paperwork for continuation of benefits for him past 18. He is working and earning gross roughly $500 a month. I'm using your firm for guardianship. Do I have anything to be concerned about regarding DDD, Medicaid eligibility, etc.? I understand I need to apply as a non-DAC through DDD. Is there anything I need to be concerned with?
There was a lot of information there. So they're getting how much on a parent?
$1,200 a month on my work record.
Okay. No, you'll probably more than likely end up getting an application for the supports program waiver. So you should not have, there shouldn't be a problem. I mean, it might take a little extra work. You're not going to have to make sure DDD is aware of all of these pieces. But you should not end up in a situation where they're saying that you can't get Medicaid and therefore get your funding. I can't even venture a guess on whether or not they would challenge whether or not the individual meets the disability criteria for eligibility, because I just wouldn't even have enough information at all. But I would recommend, if you're working with somebody here, it's definitely a question to call them up and ask them, because they'll have a sense of your child's functioning.
If our family have always used our medical insurance for medical care and benefits for a child who's still under 18 years old, when is the ideal time to apply for additional benefits like Medicaid or Social Security benefits? Should we be doing this before the child graduates high school to get additional benefits? He should be getting past 18 years old, and which benefits should we apply for?
My recommendation is always that families apply for everything as early as possible, which in most cases is the age of 18. So DDD eligibility, you can put your application in as soon as the child turns 18, and I would do that. I would also be applying for SSI at 18 as well. The main reason I say this is because if you end up in a situation where for some reason, either DDD or the Social Security Administration determines your child does not meet the disability criteria, both of those are appealable issues, and they are appeals that you really must take on, because if you do not, your child will not be able to get benefits. Those appeal processes can take up to 2 years, sometimes even more. So if you start at 18 and you have this happen, it gives us the ability to have the appeal at least hopefully finished before the child actually ages out of school, so you do not end up with a gap in services where the individual's educational entitlement ends and is then home and with nothing that you can do about it. So that's my main recommendation, is always do it at 18. And yes, of course, why would you not do it at 18 and start getting those benefits? Now, Medicaid and private insurance. Medicaid is always a payer of last resort, so having private insurance doesn't preclude you from getting Medicaid. Your private insurance would just be what you would always use first. And as a personal choice with my own child, I would keep her on my medical insurance, my private insurance, for as long as I possibly can. The federal law says 26. New Jersey, under certain circumstances, allows individuals to stay on the parent policy until 30. And then even beyond all of that, if the policy itself has a rider that says that an individual with a disability can remain on the policy, all you have to do is have a doctor certify to the disability. Your child might be able to stay on that policy for as long as you're on the policy. Now, that doesn't mean that your employer has to provide it at no charge. Obviously, they can charge you for that, but sometimes it's well worth it to have the additional medical coverage for your child. So I think that answered all of the questions that were embedded in there.
Next one. What if I've been holding EE bonds given at birth in the child's name? They've matured now. Should you cash them monthly, or so they don't go over the 2,000, or put them in a special needs trust? Once cashed, will Social Security office be contacting you?
Did it say at the beginning how old the child is?
Did not.
Okay.
All this says is that the bonds have matured.
Okay. So if your child has not applied for benefits yet, cash the bonds now. I don't know how much they are either. So if we're talking about, $3,000 to $4,000 in bonds, just get them cashed and spend them on something for the child. If we're talking about $40,000 and $50,000 worth of bonds, and the child is not on benefits yet and you have not yet applied, cash the bonds, and you're going to have to put those bonds into, probably a first party trust if it's that much. If the amount that you have is around $15,000, you can use an ABLE account. So income is what comes in during a month. So in the month that you cash the bond, that bond is counted as income for the child. Unearned income, but it is counted as income. If that bond is not spent, and you can show that it was spent on something, and it remains, the money from the bond remains there for the child on the 30th day of the month, it now turns into a resource. Your resource limit It does fluctuate, but for purposes of ease here, we're going to say it's $2,000 because most of the programs that we talk about have a $2,000 resource limitation. If you're going to be over that, you are going to not be eligible in the month that you are over that amount. So you need to cash the money, spend the money is the best thing to do. If you can't do that because of the amount of it, you want to cash the funds in and then you want to park them somewhere that does not affect benefits. So if it's under $15,000, you can open an ABLE account, you can cash the bonds, drop them into that ABLE account, and they will not count as a resource as long as you've done that all in that 1 month. If they're more than 15, because that's the limitation of what you can put into an ABLE account within 1 calendar year, then you need to get a first party special needs trust and the funds have to go in there. Now, if the child is under 18 or not receiving benefits yet, you have a little bit more flexibility because you can cash them in and then, use them before use the money over the period of time before the child receives or is applying for. So like with Tracy, she had a bunch of bonds. I cashed them in when she was 16. By the time she was 18 and I was applying, the funds were all spent. So and I kept records of what it was in case Social Security came back and said, well, what happened to all this money? I kept records on what I spent it on for her, but it was gone. That's the easiest case scenario. If, on the other hand, the child is already receiving benefits or you're about to apply for benefits, it gets a little bit more difficult because if the amount of the bonds is larger, it's a little bit hard to show how you've spent it that quickly. So you really have to look at that. And if the child's already receiving benefits and Social Security was not notified that you have these bonds, that's another problem because it is incumbent on you to let them know all the resources that the individual has. So that could create another little wrinkle. So I've kind of answered it depending on where the child is in those 3 stages. I hope that answered the question.
My son gets SSI monthly payments. It is my understanding we can use his money as reimbursements for room and board without having to specifically have him pay individual bills, correct?
Yes, you can. Yep, you can. Which basically means you're just transferring it to you. I typically do not recommend, and this is not a legal issue. I mean, you can do it that way. More of a practical parent issue. I recently went through a Social Security audit. They just called up and said, hey, we want to see all of Tracy's bank statements for the last 3 years, and we want records of everything you spent the money on. Mine was pretty darn simple because I don't do that. I don't transfer money just to me. So I didn't have them come back, and I see this happen with my clients all the time. Social Security is, okay, you transferred all this money to the other account, but what did it get spent on? I literally just copied my statements and sent them in because I use a debit card, and every single thing, it said Macy's, it said JCPenney, it said, ShopRite. So they had everything that they needed in one felt swoop. So for a practical matter, I usually recommend that my clients do it that way. I get that it's a whole lot easier to just say, oh, I got $500 in, let me just transfer it to my account. I'm clearly using it on her living expenses. But you can absolutely do it that way. It's just not my recommendation.
Okay. And that's all the questions so far.
Okay, well, I think we're kind of almost out of time, so that worked out pretty perfectly. So everyone, thank you very much for attending our conference and this workshop. I hope that you found it informative. Everybody stay safe and be well, and hopefully we'll see you on one of the next 2 sessions that we have coming up. So thank you.
Thank you for watching this encore presentation from the Fall 2020 Hinkle, Pryor and Fisher Parent Empowerment Conference. With 24 other presentations to view, there is plenty of additional information to help you become empowered. As a reminder, the information contained in this video is not a substitute for individual legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Copyright 2020 Hinkle, Pryor and Fisher, PC, Attorneys at Law. All rights reserved.